Newsnight to the life of anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela, who passed away on the 5th of December 2013. We will be looking at his life and, of course, what he will be remembered for and what we can learn from Nelson Mandela. That on Newsnight with Andrew Mwenda. Now, as we said, Andrew Mwenda is joining us on this discussion as we talk about the life and times of Nelson Mandela. Andrew joins us via Skype. He's not in the country, but he would want us to believe he's actually in South Africa. Andrew, researcher, fellow of the Stanford University, but also the CEO of the Independent magazine and, of course, a journalist. Andrew Mwenda, many thanks for joining us via Skype. You want to clear the air on where you are right now?
You keep forgetting that you're supposed to call me the old man. I'm inside Nelson Mandela's house, where he has just where the family have given me a large bedroom.
Andrew, let's discuss Nelson Mandela. You're a historian, and many have known you to be either pro-Euro or even Afro history. Basically, what would you remember Nelson Mandela for, as Andrew?
Well, first and foremost, Mandela was a very shrewd and skillful politician. You see, initially Mandela believed that apartheid could not end without armed struggle. But I think the very many years he stayed in jail, he understood that it was difficult to achieve military victory, and if that was possible, it would take many decades and a lot of bloodshed. So he changed his position and decided that the talks could be or negotiations could be the process through which you could end apartheid. That is a significant aspect of his leadership style. The second is that for him to initiate talks, Mandela actually had to go against the official policy of the ANC, and he started these talks secretly without informing the ANC. Initially, when this information leaked, the ANC declared him a sellout and a traitor. But I think what kept Mandela in the game, in the political game, one was his deep belief in the fact that only negotiations could end apartheid, and then two, because he was willing to sacrifice his political career for what he believed in. If you look at Uganda, Morris, today, you realize that our politicians are very afraid to compromise. They are very afraid to reach out to the other side because they think, especially the opposition, that by trying to reach out to Museveni, that's a sign of weakness. Or for that matter, it's a sign that they have been compromised. You have seen Lukwago, you have seen Besigye refuse to talk to Museveni because they fear that their supporters will consider them to have been sacrificed, rather to have been compromised. But what we learned from Mandela, and which is so important, is he was willing to take the risk of being considered to have been compromised in order to pursue something he believed was the right thing to do.
And Andrew, what would the African leaders learn from a person who was in prison for 27 years and came out of prison and only served one term in office? And we've seen most of the people that actually have claimed to be his friends, have claimed to actually have studied the politics of South Africa and participated in the anti-apartheid campaign, who are still in office and continue to say, Mandela, we can learn more from Mandela as an African nation, but also as the world.
You see, Morris, I used to be a fanatic of term limits, and I also used to be a strong believer that leaders should rule for a short time. But I always adjust my views to experience. The more I have read about the countries in East Asia that have been transformed, Singapore, where Lee Kuan Yew ruled for almost 36 years, China/Taiwan, where Chiang Kai-shek ruled for 50 years, Suharto in Indonesia, who ruled for 32 years. It seems to me that leaders in East Asia who transformed their countries stayed in power for quite a long time. So staying in power for a long time is not the problem. Perhaps in Africa we should ask ourselves, why is it that our leaders who stayed in power for a long time, like Nancy Beyadema, like Masho Mobutu Sese Seko, and people like Kenneth Kaunda, who were great and good men, or Julius Nyerere, did not achieve rapid economic transformation. So I don't think that there is much of a lesson to learn from the fact that Mandela left. Perhaps I could say that Mandela became president at the age of 76. He left when he was 81. If you ask Mugabe, Mugabe would say, I am 80 years. So I am 1 year younger than when Mandela left power.
Interesting. Andrew, let's discuss what Mugabe said not so long ago when he said that the offer by Mandela to actually speak to the opposition, to speak to the other side, was actually un-African and rather saintly and not stuff of the reformists or those you'd call revolutionaries. What would you say about that?
Is that what Mugabe said?
Yes. He said he was too nice too nice to the opposition to actually speak to the opposition.
Then Mugabe's own history would not agree with that assessment. If you look at people like Yoweri Museveni's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Henry Oryem Okello, is a son of the late President Tito Okello, who is the person that Museveni overthrew. I personally have driven with President Yoweri Museveni to visit Mrs. Miria Obote at his home. And as you can see from Museveni's cabinet, he has worked with so many people from different political persuasions. Many of them were his enemies and opponents, whom he has finally won over. If you look at the reconstruction of Rwanda, you will see that in the government of President Kagame and in many institutions of government, there are many people, many of them accused actually of having been participating in the genocide, who have been forgiven, or they have deliberately turned a blind eye to their crimes in order to achieve internal political accommodation. So nation building, which Mandela was involved in, and which many African presidents are involved in, requires the kinds of compromises that Mandela made. That's why I said a lot of the compromises that Mandela made were not made out of his character. They were made out of political necessity. He realized that there was no better alternative than having to reach out to the opposition. Look at Kenya here. In 2008, the violence was between the leaders of the Kalenjin and the leaders of the Kikuyu communities. On one side was Ruto, on the other side was Uhuru Kenyatta. The two of them now are forming a coalition. That is a sign of reaching out to the opposite person and accommodating their interests. So I personally believe that what Mandela did has been done by very many African leaders. Yakubu Gowon is one of them, Joaquim Chissano is another, Museveni, Kagame, and Uhuru Kenyatta. All these leaders have done what Mandela did. The difference between them and Mandela is that the beneficiaries of Mandela's magnanimity were white people, and the Western media, dominated by white people, of course, has broadcast all this as grand and unique. Actually, it is not. This forgiving of enemies and working with your former enemies is a key characteristic trait of many African leaders who are building our nations, but even American leaders. Abraham Lincoln worked with his opponents.
All right, Andrew, and finally, in your own words, would you say the times were on Mandela's side? That in that history, to judge history, it will be hard to find another Mandela as we go forward, because it's a different time scale. The environment has changed, and clearly Mandela at his time was propelled by the circumstances around that time, and that it will be hard to find somebody else like Mandela that the world will want to associate with, but will also want to speak of and of course remember as revered as Mandela is.
Well, first of all, as I have told you, I do not see anything that was so unique, except even for one term, there are many African presidents like General Afrifa of Ghana. He ruled about 2 years and handed over power to an elected government. Olusegun Obasanjo from 1975 to 1979, he handed over power peacefully. So there is nothing that Mandela has done that many other African leaders have not done. What I can commend Mandela for, he was politically wise. He understood political necessity. And he also decided early on, more than many African leaders, but some have done like him, he had been willing to listen to his opponents, to understand the interests and concerns of his opponents, to integrate them into the political process. And I have told you, many African leaders, if you look at across the continent, have done exactly what Mandela did. So the difference between Mandela and other African leaders really is not in the actions they took, but the construction of the Mandela myth by the international media. That is not to take any credit away from Mandela. Mandela is, without a doubt, an exceptionally great man. And I also believe that many African leaders have been exceptionally great and insightful. It is simply that they have not, their achievements have not received the kind of international media attention as Mandela's did.
Many thanks, Andrew Mwenda. And that was Newsnight.